Welcome to the Building Master Builders podcast, brought to you by Master Builders Victoria. Since 1875, we've championed high standards and supported professionals across the building and construction industry. During this episode, we're sharing some information from one of our webinars, Apprenticeships Made Simple with Busy at Work. In collaboration with the Master Builders Victoria Outreach and Future Skills team, you'll hear from Jayde Thomas, Victorian State Manager, Busy at Work, as they talk to employers and those involved with placing apprentices. The full version of this recording is available on our website and linked in the description.
Our services cover a range of different elements. And to be honest, this graphic here I think is a little bit backwards, but marketing really love the way they've put it together, so I won't tell them they've done it wrong. But the first thing I think is important to know is that we're a free service and we are contracted under the Department of Workplace Relations, the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations. So we're on a government contract and everything that we do is free of service to employers, to schools, to apprentices. What that means is we essentially are stewards of that government contract of the apprenticeship services. Part of what we do is around education and information on promoting apprenticeships. Once people have found their apprenticeship, we try and make sure that they're set up for the most successful journey available to them. That could mean making sure that they have the relevant training organisation, employer, mentoring services if they need them or if we think that that would be of benefit to them. But really everything that we're doing is around the successful connection of an apprenticeship journey and hopefully pushing people towards their successful completion of an apprenticeship. Part of that as well is administering federal incentives, which we'll touch on later, and I'll give you an overview of what the current landscape of those look like. And then also, if people aren't sure what they should be doing with their apprenticeship, we're always the best point of contact for that first conversation. We can help them out with if you haven't had apprenticeships in your industry before and it's not a clean-cut industry where you know exactly what trade it is, we can help with those conversations around what that could look like, how you could navigate employing someone, what qualifications or training organisations would be able to support you. So I always say we're a bit like the traffic director in one sense with that education and information piece around here's where you could take that trade or this qualification could work for you, especially in those scenarios where it does need a little bit of finessing or manoeuvring to find out what exactly fits where there's some niche trades. From a business perspective, the benefit to a business of putting someone through an apprenticeship or traineeship is around boosting your productivity. So you're going to have staff that are really invested in what they're doing, but they also have a well-rounded knowledge and experience or understanding of what's expected of them to be doing. You're going to have someone who's really invested in the craft of the trade. And I always say when we're working in the trades, it is really important that there's this quality or this love of the trade that you're doing and the craftsmanship of the work involved. So having an apprentice come on where you can instill that in them and continue that down the track, that is really valuable. The other part with this is obviously there's financial incentives that can support businesses. It doesn't cover all of the costs. I'm very clear about that, but it can support the costs involved with taking someone on and training them up in a business. Studies show that when you do put someone through a qualification, it does usually support them with that retention. So they feel like they're valued in that workplace. They know that the business is investing in them, and hopefully that comes back in the same way of them returning and retaining in that business. There's an assessment process that's now part of our contract that we undertake. That assessment process is completed for every apprentice. And that's really to determine if they need any assistance with mentoring or tutorial. And that helps us to shape a conversation with their training organisation around, okay, this person's identified maybe they need some help with numeracy. The RTO can then frame themselves to prepare the best experience for them. But another part of the assessment that we do is actually with employers. So if an employer is a new employer or they haven't had an apprentice in 6 months, we have a very brief conversation with them just to gauge, is there any area that we can support with confidence in taking on an apprentice, clarifying the understanding of the expectations or making sure that our mentors are there to support with the process. Everything that our contract is aimed to do is around supporting towards that successful completion. So really these are the purposes of identifying early on, is there something that we can be flagging to help with a conversation that will support towards successful completion? Often it can be, well, someone's never had an apprentice before and they're not sure on how they navigate that system. We can then just make sure that we're supporting them every step of the way so that they feel really comfortable with what's happening. The next part is we actually do the sign up process. I always describe that like the marriage celebrant part. So we're going through with the employer and the apprentice. We're making sure everyone knows what they're agreeing into, they understand their roles and responsibilities, but also everyone's agreeing to the terms of the training contract. And that could be the qualification, the duration, the training organisation. If it's an apprentice who's recommencing their trade, making sure that everyone is really clear on the credit that's being applied. If they're recommencing, do they know whether they're starting as a first year or a second year and where that sits? We like to make sure that there's a lot of clear transparency at that sign up process. And it can take a little while to make sure that everyone is on the same page. There's lots of information we need to gather prior, which unfortunately can be frustrating, but it is part of the process and we try and make it as streamlined as we can. Another part that we work really closely with is providing organisations with information around registered training organisations, so RTOs or TAFEs. Whether you know which RTO you want to go with or whether someone has no idea, they haven't had any exposure, maybe they've had an experience with one that wasn't quite favourable and they're looking for a different model of how training is delivered. Our team have local knowledge across all of the private RTOs and TAFEs around who they can put forward. If there's someone who wants block release only or day release only, or they want someone who does part on site, our team are able to then foster the connections and relationships they've got to put you in touch with someone who might suit what you're needing. The training contract itself, once we lodge that, it gets registered on two systems. So it's a state system and also the federal system. This is what makes sure essentially that the apprentice is registered, ticks all of the boxes, all of the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, and it gets them started with their trade school. This is also what formalises any incentives that are available and makes sure that they're registered in their apprenticeship. Throughout the apprenticeship process, and often what we try and do is commence this from the actual sign-up process, we do have mentoring and support services that are available. These are available to the apprentice, but also to an employer if they opt in for those as well. And we do have some employers that are selecting that model, whether it's they haven't had an apprentice before or they're having to have conversations with the apprentice that they haven't previously had to have, and they want some guidance and support around those. From an apprentice perspective, anyone who we can see, maybe they've left school early, they're really quite young, it's their first job, they've got multiple recommencements of their apprenticeship, we're flagging on that system that, look, this is someone who could maybe benefit from a little extra support from our team, and we step in with the mentoring services. Really, those mentoring services, they're non-invasive, they don't take up too much time, but it's a dedicated person who can touch base with them at certain key points to make sure that they are feeling engaged and supported, or if they have a question, they know who they can ask with that. That mentor is then able to facilitate if they need any conversations between the employer and the apprentice, or if it's just providing some guidance for the apprentice around how they approach things. Often what we see at the minute is that the apprentices are also accessing mentoring for issues that they're having outside of the workplace. So there's nothing actually happening in the workplace, but maybe they've had a relationship breakdown or they're moving out of home and they're just not sure how they manage those emotions or whatever they're going through while they're dealing with work as well. And our mentors just step in to help make sure that they're on track with their apprenticeship and that whatever's happening separately isn't impacting them working towards their apprenticeship. When the completion of the apprenticeship happens, so again, that's the 4 years down the track, that's where we get everyone ticked off on that process. But we also like to now have conversations with people around, have you considered looking at another qualification? Do you know that there are these pathways that you can go down? Whether that's looking at a certificate for, or whether that's another qualification that's maybe not an apprenticeship or traineeship, but that we can branch them out onto. In terms of paying an apprentice and what happens with that process, a couple of things that I always like to do a bit of myth busting on is how are they employed? So they can be employed part-time, full-time, or as a school-based apprentice. They can't be employed casually, and you can't have someone as a labourer. What I will say here is part of the benefits of working with Busy at Work. So the story that we hear often at the minute is employers are struggling, and everyone's different, I will say that, but a lot of employers are saying they're struggling to find apprentices. So they're looking, but they can't seem to find a good apprentice, or they can't find one that's really invested in the trade or the right fit for their business. What Busy at Work are doing is we're actively working with a lot of the pre-apprenticeship classes, and those in the pre-apprenticeship class that are really showing us they're interested, they're invested, they're that top percentage. We're working with them to collect their resumes and then put their resumes in front of our employers where we know they're looking for an apprentice, but maybe they don't have the time to put up their ad for their apprenticeship vacancy, or they've put up the ad, but they've been inundated with hundreds of people that aren't really appropriate for them. So we're trying to connect the pre-apps or apprentices who have cancelled out of their apprenticeship that are seeking a new employer. We're trying to really bridge that gap and support with that connection. If you fall into that category where you're looking for an apprentice, but you actually don't know where to look, or you're having no luck, my details are all at the end, but you can reach out to us and we will support with that process as much as possible as well. Part of the other process that we're working really thoroughly on at the minute is conversations around what apprenticeship programs could look like. So often people know the basics of it, the main trades that we get asked about, and the biggest apprenticeship numbers month after month after month are carpentry, plumbing, and electrical. But we always look at conversations around the other trades and how can we promote these other trades? How can we have a look at what qualification can fit into your business, or have you considered this? Have you considered that? So we really try and make sure that we're tapping into all options available. Another part of what we work on and what we're supporting with is the technical support around managing the ADMS system. So if you currently have apprentices, you might know the term ADMS, you might be flinching, you might be starting to have your eye twitching. It's a difficult one to navigate if you're first starting, but our team are happy to support with that and make sure that we can help you get logged onto that. Even if you're not with us, to a degree, we can, it's a little bit limited, but we can help you out with how you can get onto that system and try and navigate that process because it's a little bit complex. The purpose of Busy, and I guess one of the main things that we look at, is we've been around for over 45 years. We're really invested in empowering the trades and apprenticeship careers. I love data, and I always look at what percentage of our sign-ups and of the work that we do every year is with small businesses and people who are taking on 1 to 2 apprentices. It's over 50%. It's up around 58% at the minute of our business that is small business taking on 1 or 2 apprentices. And I think it's really important to see and understand the value of that, the value of what investing in your trade and the craftsmanship of your trade and passing that on to someone, how important that is. So any way that we can support with that, as it says on here, we've got a team across multiple states, but in Victoria in particular, we cover the whole state of Victoria, and we're really invested in how can we support apprenticeship pathways, building those people's careers and supporting your business with passing on your trade.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Building Master Builders. To access the full recording and explore more resources, visit mbav.com.au. For expert guidance informed by real industry experience, you can also reach out to us at mbassist@mbav.com.au or call 9411 4555.
This podcast was recorded on Wurundjeri land. MBV pays respect to elders past, present and emerging.